I got a young lady over here who's coming after anybody who's talking, so be quiet. I get the privilege of introducing Kim Stacy. I talked with him a little while this afternoon, and decided, I really like him. So I'm looking forward to his presentation. If I told you everything that he has done and accomplished in his life, he wouldn't have any time left. And so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to simply tell you that he is a military historian. He has 35 years of service in the U.S. military. He has served as command historian for Michigan and South Carolina National Guards. He has a bachelor's degree in medieval history, American history, and military science, as well as a master's in teaching history. Now here's the interesting part. His expertise centers on the British Army during the American Revolution. But being the wise man that he is, he's going to talk to you tonight about the day in the life of a revolutionary patriot soldier. Kim Stacy.
Thank you, sir. Okay, can you hear me in the back? No? Louder? Is that better? Here? Anybody else? Can you hear me in the back? Okay, we're good to go. My name is Kim Stacy. The uniform is the 84th Royal Highland Immigrants, which served down here in South Carolina. Like Utah Springs is probably the most famous one you know about. What I want to talk about tonight, though, is about the common soldier. I was a grunt, and for me, I want to know what he wiped his butt with. I want to know what he ate. I want to know what he was thinking. I want to know what he felt like when he was drunk and fell down and got hurt. So I want to get in the weeds. What I'm doing tonight is from dusk till dawn. Now, they didn't have watches. Only officers had watch. And sometimes they didn't even have watches, but there was one that always went to the officer of the day. Everything was done by the beat of the drum. And as a recruit, you would learn 35 to 40 distinct drumming sounds. And you would know if it was your drummer that was beating the drum. You could tell. The whole life revolved around that. From the time they get up in the morning, when they're called to duty, when they're training, for example, when they're training on evolutions of the musket, how to load and fire, how to maneuver, right face, left face, charge, retreat, fix bayonets. It's all done by the sound of the drum. Mainly because in battle, with all the noise going on and the smoke, they fought war, you could hear the drums. You couldn't hear people screaming, your sergeants screaming. And definitely not the officers, because sergeants will do all the screaming. So what we're going to do is look at the typical American and British regular, continentals for the Americans. Now I tried finding something on Marion to tie this in. Those boys were always starving, they never had regular rations, they didn't have the beat of the drum, they got up and did what they wanted to when they felt like it. So for that, I'll just have to go straight with the continentals and the regulars. Charles Baxley, we've talked about him, he's the reason I'm here. 20 years ago, I met Charles, became my mentor, and Charles made suggestions on projects. Anybody who knows Charles knows about his suggestions. Wrong way. Okay, we're going to see, this first time I tried attaching the music.
The British Grenadier.
There we go. You can hear the drums from the fight. You can hear that miles off. You all know about this. These are various
British
organizations.
Grenadiers.
Okay, are you doing that or am I doing that?
You're doing it. I started with that, I don't know how high you go the other way.
Other way.
The arrow on the right.
The
Okay.
British Grenadier fanfare.
There we go. Okay, we can skip this one. Why is it? Stand by. Use your technical controls. Do not adjust your screens.
The parley.
There we go.
Church call.
Now, I'm trying to find period artwork or reenactors. A lot of it's going to be British because that's what I have the most photographs of. But it's pretty typical whether it was British or Continental soldier.
The English Reveille.
This is wake-up talk. Our time. I'm sorry, English. This is what gets him out of bed in the morning. The sergeant comes over and kicks him, throws water on him, start off the day. And normally, it starts off at twilight, not full dawn when the sun comes up, when it was just coming up on the horizon. The times you see are actually Camden time for the Battle of Camden. Sure.
I can't understand you back here.
Okay, is that better?
The music's
No, you have to turn off the music.
Or turn it down.
Why don't we turn the music down?
Try.
My apologies, first time I tried putting the music to something like this, so it's experimental for me. Is it gonna work?
The drums call.
Right after Reveille, drummers call. Oh, much better. They bring all the drummers together in one place and they start beating the Reveille, and then all the different calls for the entire day. That's all the drummer does. And with the younger drummers, and you see it in all the regimental orders, the drummers are to practice far, far away. It's like bagpipers. Okay, this is the first meal of the day. This is mostly leftovers from the day before. And what you want to do is, you don't eat all your food at one time. So what they're going to start off with is they're going to draw their bread and their hardtack. On the table, everybody's got a block of hardtack. So you pick it up and tap it. Don't worry if you break it. You wouldn't want to try to eat that. So that would be part of their rations. The rations on a given day were 7 pounds of meat, usually beef, but there were substitutions, a pound of flour or bread, or Indian meal, or other substitutions. Now their weekly amount of bread, here's what it looks like. There is 7 pounds of bread. So they would get this, and they would have a guard on it. Whoever wasn't on duty guards the food. Why? The soldiers steal. It's just a given. You're a soldier, you're hungry, you're going to go find somebody else's food. And then if you get caught and punished, it's because, not that you stole it, but because you got caught. This is your daily ration. Doesn't look like much, but it has enough calories. The food that they were given every day was 3,000 to 3,500 calories. That's what we feed combat Marines and soldiers. So they didn't know about calories until a few years later, but through centuries of trial and error, they knew how much food and what type of starch that they needed to be physically active. Nothing worse than a soldier who's idle, who doesn't have something to do. Now when they get their flour in the morning, they have a fire, and if you didn't have the bread, you just got flour, you take it, add a little water to it, and throw it in the fire. Some people call them Johnny cakes, you can do with your Indian meal. So this is the basis of what they're going to be doing in the morning. You see the big kettles. Everything was stewed. Everything went into the kettle. Each kettle belonged to 5 men, which is your basic mess. These guys slept in the same tent. They shared everything. Sometimes they ate off the same spoon. When I was a young grunt, me and my partner, we only carried one spoon between us, mainly because we cut down anything that was weight.
The troop or assembly.
Now, after breakfast, they're going to get together, and there's going to be formations. It's just like the modern military. There's going to be roll call. You're going to get your duty assignments for the day before, and the next duty assignment's coming up after the officers scratch their butt and make a decision. Then they tell the NCOs who are standing around scratching their butt after the decision's done, and then they give it to the soldiers. It hasn't changed any. You can see one inspection that they would have. Today we call it junk on a buck. So you would lay out all of the kit that was issued to you. And your sergeant would come around and make sure you didn't sell off your buttons for liquor or for women not their wives. Venereal disease was a serious problem at this time. Now we have the British, more formal. You got the Continentals, and then you got the militia standing around going, what? And their officers, of course, going to argue about everything.
The English general.
This is when the duty assignments come in. They had specific beats for water, wood, pioneers march. So if you were a pioneer, you would listen to that drum beat, and then you would know where to assemble. Then you would go off and build bridges, fix roads, make bases, whatever you need to do that day would come down and by the orders. And you can see they're making a base, carrying water, building a bridge, and you see it in all the regimental books. Most regiments, companies had 2 tailors. So there are orders where the tailors would get together for an entire regiment. We're talking 1,000 men. So you've got all these men assembling in one place because the uniforms came in pieces or in 2 sizes, too large or too small. Same thing today. So they would tailor the uniforms. Now they only got new uniforms, same with the Continentals, if they were lucky for the Continentals, once a year, usually for Christmas. That was the King's birthday present, or Christmas present.
Troop for the colors.
Now this is different calls for the adjutant, the NCOs, and the first sergeant. Because paperwork and orders roll downhill, just like poop. So they're going to stand around, decide what needs to be done, who's going to do it, where are they going to do it. Now that's going to take sometimes hours. With the Continentals, they were more professional. If you had the militia, them boys would argue over everything. They wanted an explanation. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing it that way? Well, we don't think that's a good idea. And your regulars are scratching their behinds going, I can't believe this. Let's just take them out and shoot them.
The troop or assembly.
They would assemble 3 times a day. The British only twice. But because of American desertions, they would have assembly and roll call 3 times a day. In the evening, they would do a roll call to see who was missing. And then they would send out parties to search for them. Sometimes they would just have the local bordello. Sometimes they were out stealing chickens. Or sometimes they just decided, I'm going home. With the militia, that was pretty common. They had short enlistments, and sometimes they felt like it, I'm just going to go home and see the old lady. Or I've got 20 acres of corn that's going to come in. So I'm not hanging around. I don't care what it said on the paper. I'm leaving. And usually when they came back with the militia, they weren't punished much. Now early on, like with the first battle of Siege of Charleston, that Doug had talked about, they would hang or shoot some of the guys that deserted. I mean, they were that serious about it. But later on, like with Marion's guys, people have talked about it, they just came and went. Sometimes he had 1 or 2 men. Other times he had 30 or 40. Oh, wrong button.
Charge bayonet.
Okay, they practice. One of the things that's a great myth is the British didn't aim their muskets. Because in the drill books it says present. Present, when you read enough of them, means aim. And they would constantly practice shooting at targets or marks. A lot of times they would shoot at barrels in the water to practice shooting at moving targets. It's really hard to shoot somebody when they're running. So you have to practice how to lead it. or leave the person you're going to shoot. It's just like if you're duck hunting, for those of you who bird hunt. You don't aim where the bird is, you're going to aim where he's at. So they would go through all the basic movements, just basic drill. Now, if you were an awkward man, the sergeants, or a corporal in this case, would take you around and drill you over and over and over again until you learn how to turn right face, left face, about face, all those basic maneuvers. Now, what they would also do is practice loading, firing. At the bottom, where the music sign is, these are light infantry. These are hard veterans. And what they do is they're practicing maneuvering in very small groups. At Utah Springs, one of the myths was when the Americans collided with the pickets, the British soldiers just ran back to Utah Springs. Well, that's not true, because they ran into the provincial light infantry. Let me say that again, provincial light infantry. These guys were hard veterans. In reality, and we're working to redo the Battle of Utah Springs, is they were so well trained, they didn't need officers. A small group of like 5 men, a mess, would run 100 yards, set up another ambush. And they did this for 5 to 6 miles. Now the Americans at Utah Springs, one cavalry officer, American, was ordered to go down the road. And in his letter to his wife, he says, this is suicidal, it's a forlorn hope, which basically means you're going to attack knowing full well you're not going to succeed, and you're likely to die. Now, punishment. Soldiers are always getting caught and doing something they shouldn't be doing. Flogging was one of the common ways of dealing with serious infractions. And with the British, sometimes you could get over 1,000 lashes. The Continentals, it was considerably less. But in reality, you didn't get that many because you didn't want to kill him. You just wanted to teach him a lesson, and more so, the people around him to teach them a lesson, not to get caught. It was like for theft. And you can see where the flogging is. And what it does is a cat of 9 tails, and it takes the skin off your back, and then the surgeon, who's not really a doctor or surgeon as we would think of it, more like a barber with a razor, and he would take salt and rub it in the wounds to cauterize it. That'll put you on your tippy toes. Hangings. It was rare. A lot of people were condemned on both sides, Continentals and British, to be hung for serious infractions like rape, murder, sometimes desertion, breaking your parole, especially if you're an officer. But usually, when it went up to a higher headquarters, the commanding general would say, no, we'll get him up there, put the noose on his head, make him think we're going to hang him, cut him down, and hopefully he's learned his lesson and goes on to be a good, upright Christian gentleman. No, it doesn't work that way. Sometimes you can be tied with shackles, usually out in the open, and everybody would come by and throw things at you. If there was like horse dung, they might rub it in your face. So it's just like in the medieval pillories and stocks. You're out there, just mercy of the weather, and people around you want to teach you a lesson. Now, we've got the Highlander with the Grenadier to the top left. Sergeants usually take business by chewing somebody's butt out. Same thing today. Well, now today you have to write them off a counseling statement. What happened to going behind the building and using what we call kinetic counseling? Whack! Don't do it again. So you could get your butt chewed or maybe smacked around. Or at the bottom right, if the commanding officer thought it was appropriate for whatever you've done, like to irritate him, you might dig latrines or graves, but usually latrines. And hopefully, with the British Army, they learned to dig the latrines downstream because the tea tasted better in the morning. The Americans still haven't got hold of that yet. Okay, the next meal is roast beef, beef upon a trencher. Roast beef was another beating, but unfortunately I didn't have that. So that's the big meal of the day. Everybody gets together, you can see the big 3-gallon kettles, and you can see the stews that they would have. And they would have the leftovers. If you had cheese, maybe you save a little bit of cheese or butter with your bread for breakfast. a lot of times you had oatmeal or rice, so you might cook that separately if you could. You eat the stew, and then make the oatmeal or the rice, and then eat it, because you couldn't have separate servings. You just didn't have the equipment to do that. One thing about rice is both sides hated it. It was slave food. But they ate it because you're hungry, you eat what's in front of you. Just like growing up, Mom, I don't want to eat that liver. I can sole my shoes with it. Well, you're not getting up the table till you eat it. You'll eat it when you get hungry. No, I won't. Even the dog would eat it.
The troop sequence. 3 rolls, rising of the troop.
Okay, these are various vehicles. What they do is at night, you take all the wagons, you put the horses in between, because stealing horses, both sides would do that. That was the big prize, is to get the horses. And you would logger, South African term, and put them in a circle, like in the Westerns. When they have the wagon trains, the Indians are going around and around, that's the same idea. And you could use it as a defense. Now, to make sure everybody knew that the evening was ending, the artillery piece that they had one would fire. And so you knew the day's coming to a close, you get to relax a little bit if you're not on duty. Now, I don't think they had elephants, but who knows? Continentals, they were creative.
Tap 2.
Tap 2 means it's the end of the duty evening, the duty day, and what you would have is a good excuse to get rip-roaring drunk. The rum that they had was about pure alcohol. It's 190% proof, which is almost pure alcohol. So they made it into grog. The sergeant would watch you drink it in most cases if it was the official issue. Because with each meal, you were issued 4 ounces of rum. In reality, there would be like 8 ounces of rum that's 80 proof. So also, sutlers and women, not their wives, would also sell illegal rum. Now the problem with that is all the guys are getting drunk on duty, and at the end of the evening, Tap 2, the duty officer and the NCOs would go around on the watch and make sure there was no more illegal liquors being sold. So they're going to be playing cards. Up in the upper right-hand corner, if you go to a reenactment, you see all the women dressed as camp followers. And they all look pretty. Mainly because when my first wife went to a reenactment, she says, well, I'm not wearing all those rags. Is it okay here? I'm not going to win this argument. And you had washerwomen. Camp followers worked as nurses in the hospital because they were only allocated so many per company depending on the time and place. And they were issued half rations. If they had children, quarter rations. If you weren't part of that official women on the roster, it was whatever you could get. So then you're selling illegal liquor, you might be raising your skirt for a little extra money in the wet grass, and spreading that good old venereal disease. In the British Army, if you came down with a dose, you couldn't do guard duty for a couple of days. Mainly medically, you were just unfit, and I won't get into the rest of the details unless you've been there. And so somebody else had to do your duty. So they would fine you money to pay the guys that had to take your additional guard duty.
From favored heirs.
Now they had free time after Tap 2.
Farewell.
And what they would do is in the upper left, lice patrol.
Barring the order.
That was very, very common. During reenactments, people were, well, how authentic are you? So, do you have lice? Do you have smallpox scars? Well, no, then get away from me. I don't want to talk to you, you idiot. There's levels of authenticity, and then how far are you willing to go? They would play various games. So one of the 2 redcoats, one with a hat off, is they go back to back, and they would try to knock each other's hat off. So that was just one of the silly games. They would do leg wrestling, which I don't have a picture of. And they would do things like that. At the bottom, you see the Highlander and the 84th Highlander looking at a drunk soldier. Now I can tell if he's in the 84th, he's looking to steal this guy's money. Cleaning and doing maintenance on your weapon. When I was in the desert, 3 times a day, I cleaned my weapon. Last thing I want to do when I need it, that I have a malfunction. It doesn't change. they would play forms of cricket. Now, full contact cricket with Highlanders, here's a secret. There's no underwear under the kilts. So when you go after a high fly ball and pirouette, everybody anywhere else can see what you're wearing under the kilt or not wearing. Early forms of baseball, called rounders, which eventually during the Civil War became Old Coast baseball today. Twilight. That's when the evening's done. They play God Save the King or Chester. Now, I'm not sure if both of them are going to play on this one. And that's played in the camp, meaning the total day's over, go to sleep. You need your 8 hours because you got to get up at twilight the next day and start it all over again. If you're a British soldier, you do that for 30 years. If you're a provincial, just for the duration of the war. Continentals, 1, 2, 3 year enlistments. So they're not eating the same food for 30 years, doing the same thing for 30 years. The 64th Regiment. Constantly you see the reference to them, because these guys were all in their late 40s, 50s, and 60s. So you see all the reference to the gray and silver hair. Imagine being a combat soldier at that age. Just amazing how tough these guys were. And we'll
God
see if
Save
it
the King.
Let's see if Chester will play.
Chester.
There we go. I love technology. This is the American version of the Star Spangled Banner, or God Save the King. Now, an advertisement. The reenactment north of Camden this year is on the 8th, 9th, and 10th. Last year on Friday, it was all kids. It was all geared for children, hands-on activities. Homeschoolers brought over 3,000 students. Public school are too lazy, the teachers, and I was one at one time, to write for the grants for the buses. And then, when they show up, what they do, which ticks me and everybody else off, is the teachers go sit in the shade someplace and let the kids run wild. Homeschoolers, which I dearly love, because I was involved with it in the 80s getting it organized, is those kids are chaperoned. A parent stays with each group. They don't run wild. And they're very interested, and they're a lot smarter than our public school students at the same age or grade. So for this, please come to it. For the last 6 years, it's been the biggest reenactment in North America. And I can say that with all honesty, because when I was up north, we had some big, big reenactments. And because of COVID, when COVID came, we had a medical tent set up, we had doctors in the group. So we set it all up, but being outdoors, you didn't need that silly mask, which didn't work anyway. And so we did it. We had people rent buses and come down from New Jersey. We had the New Jersey Lights bring 20 guys on a bus and all their kit, and others. We had the first Rhode Island, which was all Negro troops at the time. A whole bunch of those guys came down, which was outstanding.
Royal March.
Yeah, we can skip that.
God Save the King.
Yeah, we can skip this one. Okay, that's it. Questions? Yeah, the fifes, you could hear that because the high pitch, that sound frequency waves, you could hear over cannons, all the rifles and muskets being shot off, everybody screaming. And like I mentioned earlier, you knew the sound your musician was playing. So each one, you could just tell by ear because this is how you lived. That was your timepiece. All day long, and again, if you're a regular, for 30 years. So for that, and again with the drums, you could hear that over the beat, the frequency of it, over all the battlefield noise. More questions?
Kim,
Yes, sir.
talk to us some more, please, about the hardtack. Was it really that hard? And then would they dip it into
Okay.
water? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the hardtack was issued, and how it's made is they take flour, a pinch of salt, and a little bit of water, and they make a big thick paste out of it, and they cook it at a low temperature 3 times to take all the moisture out of it. Now, the only critters that can live inside it are weevils. So these things still, they're in museums, 300 years old, they're still edible, believe it or not. Originally, they were called ship's biscuits because they last for years. For example, when a ship, British ship, is circumnavigating the globe, it was perfect. Now, what you do with it, I don't know what I do with it. Okay, what you do is it's so hard, you tapped it. If you try to bite into that, you are going to lose teeth. So what they do is you take and pound it with a rock into small pieces or into a powder, back into basically flour. Now, you take small chunks of it if you're on the march, and you stick it like a piece of tobacco in your cheek, and let the saliva reconstitute the moisture. And finally, when it's soft, and you know when it gets soft, it's like when bubble gum is no longer good, to eat, Or you take that powder in lumps, everything was stewed. You saw the stew pots? The flour in the chunks would go in there early on, sort of like dumplings, and that would thicken up the sauce in the stew, and also soften up those lumps, sort of like a dumpling. And basically, you could keep these things in your pocket on the go. If you're going to issue bread, because you have to have somebody baking it, which is a problem. Oh, and if you come to a reenactment, one guy has a beehive oven, 18th century, he put it on a trailer, it's great. It's from Mount Vernon, and he cooks pureed breads. You can have fresh butter, not the stuff we get in the supermarket, or lard. For your older southern people, there's the lard. The problem is the line's like so long, I never get to eat it. But it's great, so he cooks bread like this. So again, with the hardtack, you got to bust it up. There's no other way around it. And there's all sorts of really crude jokes about it, which I'll spare. But knocking the weevils out, personally, I would leave them in. Free protein. So it's like if you had a vegetable stew growing up, like we had a garden, and like the broccoli, the little worms would float to the top. And my father would scoop it off, and after a while I said, don't worry about it, just eat it, it's protein. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, and more.
You're welcome. Yeah, I like to talk. Other questions? Sir?
How could you make it incorrectly? How could you ruin it or making angry stuff?
Say again, please.
The way you're describing it with the hardtack, it didn't seem like there's no wrong way to make it. I mean,
It was basically made in factories, small factories, beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And so they specialized as a bakery making nothing but hardtack. It was just water, flour, and a pinch of salt. And they would bake it 3 times, low temperatures, and then box it up into barrels, and then ship it out. And very, very simple. You can do that. The recipes are online if you really want to try making it at home. If you're that bored, you can make it. So it's very, very simple. But it's a good way of keeping all that starch in one place.
how could you make it taste
You can't. And you don't have ketchup or mustard or honey or jams to put on it. And if you did, you still couldn't bite into it. So the only flavor you get is as a dumpling in your stew or your soup. But there was no taste. I mean, it was just flour. That's it. But even if you put something on there, yeah, you're not going to be able to bite into it. Other questions? Sir?
Talk about your uniform, red, you get a uniform once a year, uniform that you're wearing all year, in all kinds of weather, rain, snow, sleet. By the end of that year, would your uniform be pink?
The red at that time, and even today, it's not color fast. Now, with the red coats, with all the weather and everything, would turn pink, or purple, or brown, all depending. Now, when in reality, all the buttons would be missing. You probably sold them off for a woman's favor or for alcohol, and there would be all sorts of patches. And for like the waistcoat down here, you didn't wear the waistcoat until at night when you're on guard duty because of the heat. So basically, everything was done in a shirt, a linen shirt. And the coats, if you're on work details, you didn't wear them. You would leave it back in camp because you didn't want to get them all torn. We tried to save it. If the weather's inclement, you turn it inside out and wear it. Again, most of the ones would be gone by then. And that way stains or cuts and things on it, it's not a problem. But I should have put a picture up there. By Utah Springs, British soldier, he was all ragged out. He had patches everywhere. His shoes would be falling off his feet. And just like when the Continentals, especially the militia, walking barefoot because their shoes wore out. Ragtag and bobtail, which is what they said the colonials were, because they didn't get uniforms at least once a year, and you would try to preserve it as much as you can. By the time you got to Camden, the Continentals were all ragged out too. It's not like you see in a reenactment or in movies. By then, patches everywhere. And there are reenactors who take their brand new trousers, drag it behind their pickup truck down the dirt road just to get it tore up and stained, and then put the patches on it, just to be more authentic. But again, for reenactments, it's just like the women. They want to look pretty, the guys want to look pretty. So they look pretty much like they're coming off parade with a brand new issue uniforms. That's not realistic. Imagine running through the brambles and the briars down here in South Carolina in the heat and the insects and everything else, and working hard. It's going to catch on everything, and it's going to rip and tear, and you're going to lose buttons. That's why we find them in historic sites. We find buttons, they just fall off. But basically, yeah, it wasn't color fast. But you could tell, especially with the British, and sometimes with the Continentals, by the color of their facings, their cuffs and facings. At a distance, you could figure out what regiment it is. Far, far away, without binoculars or a looking glass. And if you could see the lace, you could tell what regiment it was. So if the 84th is way over there, I can point and say, that's the 84th Regiment, just by looking at the color of their facings. And Doug was talking about the land battle for Sullivan's Island. I've done a lot of work on this, and we're going to work together on the next year for a presentation. The Americans shot what they thought was a British officer. And I figured out who it was, because he had black facings. There was only one regiment there that had black facings. So we knew who they actually killed during a raid. And why could I figure that out? Because I looked, saw the color of his facings, and went back into the records and said, that's the only regiment there with black facings. So I cross-indexed them. So did that answer your question, sir? And so, next. No other questions? Yes, ma'am.
After the revolution, did they settle the 82nd someplace in North America?
The 82nd, the 84th, pretty much went up to Nova Scotia. The 1st Battalion, 84th, was up in the Great Lakes, so they settled in Ontario. And they were promised X amount of acres at the end of the war, usually 100 per man, 50 for a wife and children. But when they got there, of course, corruption, they got the poorest land. So you couldn't really farm on it. And there was no reason of going back to Scotland or England, wherever you were from, because of the poverty. You know, you were a laborer. Being in the military, you ate well. You had the best medical care available. You had travel. You had free postage. If you were wounded, there was a hospital system where you could draw your pension. In Chelsea today, outside of London, they still have the hospital. And the veterans there all still wear the Victorian red coats and uniforms. And you see them, they go into town. I made a mistake of accidentally walking into their barracks and had to make a serious lengthy apology. So with that, being a soldier wasn't really a bad occupation. For example, a laborer, or if you were a farmer. Well, what were the landlords doing is throwing you off the land to raise sheep. They didn't need whole communities and all these laborers working the land if they were just farming. Sheep only need a few people to take care of them. The same with most of the Scots during the French and Indian War before the American Revolution. Most of the Highlanders stayed here in North America, mostly up around the St. Lawrence and upstate New York. Again, what's at home for you? A lot of the regulars, if you were a lifer, you would be sent, if your regiment was under strength, you'd be sent as a draft to another regiment to fill them, what we call backfill today. And so you stayed in your career, you kept your rank, your seniority, but you would go to another regiment. One of the problems was the regiments that were down here in the South were sent to the Fever Islands. Because North America, we weren't worth the money for the rebellion, according to the Crown. Where the money was in the cane, sugars, slaves, rum, and alcohol, and molasses. So they were making 10 times more money in the islands versus what they would make off North America. So economics, we need to stop this war, we need to make a treaty, and we'll be back another day. And right after the treaty was signed, guess who was back in Charleston Harbor buying lumber for ships? The tall pines for spars and masts, lumber, especially live oak, for making the hulls of ships. So as soon as the British merchants could get back into the harbor, they had gold and silver. The American merchants had paper. What's paper worth? Nothing. But if I have gold and silver, even if you were a staunch patriot, you're going to be practical and sell your stuff to me. You got to feed your family. Lo and behold. Other questions?
I do have one.
Yes, sir.
This ain't going to sound nice after we just ate, but soldiers get sick.
Yes.
They have diarrhea.
Oh, yes.
If you're marching, you have diarrhea, and you gotta go, do you ask for permission to leave, or do you just go?
No, pretty much, everybody, for example, the Americans coming down to Camden, they were hungry, they were eating raw green fruit, and in lieu of alcohol, they gave them molasses. Well, what that did is that loosened up their bowels. I've talked to veterans in the Pacific where everybody had dysentery, and they would just cut the back out of their pants. And your sergeant, he knows you've got it, so you're not deserting. You're off in the bushes, side of the road, taking care of business. You take some leaves, clean yourself up, and then run up and get back in formation. But you may have to do that if you've got really bad dysentery, every 100 yards. So you would fall back in. I mean, the sergeants and corporals knew, what was going on. One of the things, for every soldier that was killed, 10 died of disease. You had all sorts of fevers down here, yellow fever, malaria, and what was worse was everybody had dysentery from the water. Now the Brits normally boiled their water before drinking it. The Americans, not quite so smart, which is interesting because a great many of the American Continental officers were British Army officers at one time. It's like they had a brain aneurysm, just forgot all these basics. So with dysentery, very, very common. The 71st, which was up by Charlotte, keeping the Americans at bay, raiding the American supply lines that were coming in from their commissaries. So many of them were sick with fevers and dysentery. 3/4 of them were sick. So they had to bring them back to Camden. Now, the ones that recovered went on to fight at the Battle of Camden. But dysentery, very, very common. And dysentery will kill you. You will die of dehydration. Now, some of the things they could do is if they had honey, you could take big globs of honey. That'll slow down your intestines. In my day, you had the little tins of peanut butter, and there was oil on the top. You just take the peanut clump, and you would eat that, and that would bind you up. You could take your raw sugar, like white crystal sugar, suck it down, and that would slow down your intestines. Now, if you're constipated, you take that peanut oil and drink it, and that's going to loosen you up. So it was the same back then. They had some practical solutions, but it wasn't very effective. And it was the old sergeants that learned these tricks, how to stay alive. And just like today, my young Marines and soldiers, my job was to teach them how to stay alive. And how to take their food, make it palatable, basic combat medicine. You take that peanut oil and put it on abrasions, because it works pretty good, and put a bandage over it if you have a cut. Honey is a natural antibiotic. So instead of going out of the field, you would take honey. We'd always steal out of the mess halls, because if you need calories, you take that little like ketchup package of honey, bite it off, and just suck it all down. But if you've got a wound, you don't want to go out of the field, you can put the honey on it, put a Band-Aid or bandage over it, and it'll keep the flies off. And also, the antibiotic properties in the honey will keep you from getting infected. So it's just common sense things. Soldiers learned from the time before the Romans, just common sense things. The Romans lived on oatmeal, and I like my oatmeal not sloppy. I like it so it's really thick and clumpy. And if you make it even more clumpy, all that oatmeal, that's going to bind you up. So if you had an oatmeal ration, that's another common sense practical thing the soldiers could do. But everybody had dysentery. And it was just a given, you're going to have it. The question is whether or not you're going to poop yourself to death. Other questions? Am I running out of time here?
You had the question.
Anybody else?
He had his hand up. If they weren't seeing it, that's fine.
Just got a question.
Yeah, Kim, I saw a picture recently of some guys in Burma in World War II, and they were all marching without any pants on at all because of dysentery.
Yeah, you see it. I've interviewed hundreds of veterans from the Pacific, and it was very common, depending on how bad you had it. But in there, like in Burma, because of the rot, your uniforms are just rotting off you anyway. The boots were the most important thing, and the leather would rot quickly, and so they usually those were airdropped in with your food and medical supplies. But yeah, I have no modesty. As a young recruit, I'm in a barracks with 80 other guys and only 6 toilets. So you learn, it's like, I go to the hospital, the doctor's saying, well, do you mind if I take a peek? No, trousers down, take a look. I don't care. It's nothing you haven't seen before. But with soldiers, again, there's no modesty involved, it's just being practical. But sometimes the guys, I don't want to get too gross with this, but if you had really bad, you would just go while you're marching. And especially if it was raining, like in the what weather? Blanking on the South Typhoons, monsoon, thank you. One thing, when I was in monsoons, and this is a given, you get out there, you get your bar of soap, as soon as you lather up, the rain stops. It's a given. But with dysentery, that's how you clean yourself up. Or if you found a stream, you wouldn't drink the water because of the parasites in it and the leeches. Now, if no one's had the pleasure of leeches before, that's when you find out how friendly you are with the guy you sleep next to. Because those leeches
That's
get
all the
all
time we have
sorts
for
of
tonight.
interesting things. They get in all sorts of interesting places, so. Back then, you would burn it off with a cigarette or a cigar, so be careful with it. You may want to have kids someday. And now they have, you put salt on them, and now they make an insecticide that you put on leeches, and they drop off. But then with leeches, if you don't know, for medical purpose, they use them today. If you have like vascular surgery, to get the excess blood out of there, they'll put a leech on there. And the leech, first of all, when it bites you, it's got a little circular mouth, and in their saliva, they have a protein that anesthetizes the wound, so you don't even feel when they're biting you. And then they'll sit there and they'll get big, you know, before they drop off. And they'll drop off of trees, you know, in the water. They don't just have to be in the water. On bushes, you know, you walk through and, you know, you and your friend do leech patrol. Did that answer your question, Kip? Okay. Are we running out of time? Okay.
Yes. How about a round of applause for Kim Stacy? Everybody learned something today?